here into Georgia and South Carolina as well, in the Big Bend area of Florida. And so there too, we're going to see significant surge. So in Tampa, we've got up to 8 feet of potential surge there on the high end. And we're also looking for winds gusting to 100 miles per hour. So significant impacts in terms of wind damage as well. Same story there in Naples, surge up to 15 feet and 100 plus mile per hour wind. It could be well above that. As a matter of fact, winds could be gusting as high as 130, 140 miles per hour. Now here's a high resolution model forecast, and we may see some deviation in the ultimate track of the storm, but this is meant to illustrate how this is going to go down, roughly speaking. And again, you see the very large circulation here with the tropical storm force winds already now beginning to move in. We take this forward, and that most dangerous core of the storm will be moving into the Keys, the middle and lower Keys in particular, overnight tonight and very early tomorrow morning. So tremendous surge there, 5 to 10 feet, and also we'll be looking at tremendous wind damage across the Keys. And then you've also got winds really starting to pick up in South Florida at that time. Then into tomorrow afternoon, very dangerous core of the storm coming up into Naples and Marco Island and into Fort Myers and Port Charlotte, and all of those areas. We're going to be looking at widespread, significant wind damage, water piling up along the coast here, getting into South Florida, a tremendous onshore flow into South Florida, and also winds really starting to gust to hurricane force all across South Florida on the eastern side of the state, even though the core of the storm is farther west. So you're not seeing the very worst of the weather from the storm, but believe me, it is going to be bad in southern parts of Florida, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach counties. And then here into Monday overnight, this is 1 o'clock in the morning, we're starting to see that eye wall coming in. And again, there could be some changes in the exact timing or exact position of the storm, but this is meant to give you a rough idea of how that's going to go down. And take a look also at the flow on the underside of that circulation. So this is when we're really maximizing that surge going into late tomorrow and overnight tomorrow into Monday morning, maximizing that surge in Southwest Florida, in Naples, and down towards Everglades City. And you've also got a very large area of water level rise and wave action coming up along the east coast of Florida. Then we go into Monday morning, and we see hurricane force winds coming up into central parts of Florida, in Orlando, and farther off towards the north there into Leesburg, into the Villages. Winds could gust well over hurricane force in those areas. And at this time, we're starting to see that flow on the underside of the circulation coming up farther along the coast, getting into Siesta Key, into Bradenton, into Sarasota, starting to get into Tampa. So this is roughly the time frame when we see these really significant water level rises. And obviously, with hurricane force winds at that time, that's the last time you're going to want to try to get away from the water. So please, please do listen to your local officials and make sure you do get away from the coast there as the storm is approaching. And then as you got or well before the storm approaches, I should say. And then going into Monday evening, here we see a very significant onshore flow in Georgia and South Carolina, and we also see strong winds coming up into North Georgia and through a lot of the southeast. So even though it's not going to be necessarily a hurricane as it's coming up through North Georgia, it's probably going to be transitioning to a tropical storm from South Georgia into North Georgia. What we will see is sustained winds of perhaps 40, 50 miles per hour more, and then winds gusting to 70, 80 miles per hour. So you're talking about widespread power outages, trees down, a lot of disruption across the southeast. This area of large winds is actually going to be getting larger as the storm is transitioning away from being a tropical system and starting to take on some non-tropical characteristics. One of the things that we see with that is a much larger area of wind. So with all that in mind, there's a look at the warnings that are now in effect, hurricane warnings across the entire state of Florida, and there are hurricane watches that now extend up into Georgia. This is not a function of the level of impact, it's a function of time. And so those hurricane watches could very well change to hurricane warnings. We expect that in a hurricane warning, hurricane force winds are expected inside of 36 hours, with a hurricane watch there possible inside of 48 hours. So looking at the timing of all this, this is when we expect all the weather to move in. move in. And it's already starting now to come into South Florida. Already we're getting those tropical storm force winds in South Florida. They'll be moving up into Naples, West Palm Beach, Broward County there by this evening. So by that time, you've got to be where you're going to be sheltering. You cannot be out and about. And keep in mind that local officials have said that their public safety officers are going to be recalled once we get into tropical storm force winds. So they're going to be a lot less available to help you once those winds really start to kick in. Then farther to the north, Sunday, 8 o'clock in the morning, that's when we see the tropical storm force winds getting up towards Bradenton, Sarasota, Fort Myers, and getting up towards Tampa and St. Pete. And then during the day on Sunday, tropical storm force winds start to get up to Orlando, and eventually we are going to see hurricane force winds there in Orlando. And let's get out to Justin Michaels. He is now in the Orlando metro area. And Justin, this is going to be a really significant storm well inland with a widespread wind impacts. You know, it's not just a coastal affair. This is something that's going to have a big impact there in Orlando.
Well, Carl, and I have a question for you just about something we've been experiencing since we got here. When we showed up here today, we had beautiful blue skies, no wind whatsoever. The wind has picked up here in Orlando significantly since we got here. And in fact, looking over Lake Eola, you can see the fountain is blowing in a certain direction. Well, just so you know, you're facing east right now. Is this at all related to Irma, this wind that has been picking up and building throughout the day? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there's some wind that is related to some extent with the high pressure that is off to the north of you. So there's what we call a gradient wind. It's a difference in pressure between the hurricane and the high pressure that's off to the north. So that's a part of it, certainly. But we're seeing the strong winds now overspreading South Florida, and it's only going to continue to ramp up through the day. So yes, I think you're getting these sort of far fringe effects of the storm already.
All right, and one more question before I let you go here. We've had several different people come up to us here and talk about, hey, the storm shifted west. It's shifted west. We're going to be okay, right? And, you know, we're hearing that a lot. Hearing it from you is a lot more important than hearing it from me. I mean, you're the storm specialist. You're a meteorologist. I mean, what would you say to people who walk up to you and say, hey, it's shifted west, right? It's okay here.
Yeah, it's really important to understand exactly what the cone means. So we're looking at the forecast track, what we call the cone from the Hurricane Center. This is showing you where the most likely positions of the center of the storm will be, and that's right down the middle of this cone. The reason why it widens out over time is to account for forecast errors that occur over time. They grow larger over time. This is not an impacts cone. This is not showing you where you're going to get impacts. It does not mean that the impacts are now just going to be on the west coast of Florida and not on the east coast. It does mean that the very worst impacts are more likely on the west coast of Florida, but certainly we are going to see impacts that are well outside of that cone. And as a matter of fact, I can show you the wind field, which is very, very large. Tropical storm force winds extending out 200 miles from the center and hurricane force winds extending out 70 miles from the center. So that's well above average in terms of size. And let's go back and take a look at where that's going to be headed here in the next few minutes. And you see that very large area. This is all the tropical storm force wind that's going to be coming up and across the region. So look how much larger than the state of Florida that is. You're going to have tropical storm force wind that's well outside of the state. And this is what we mean by that. This is why this is going to be such a long lasting event. And looking at where that wind field is going to go, there's the hurricane. So that's the sustained wind in red there in southwest Florida. That's into tomorrow afternoon. This is the very worst of the storm. These are hurricane force wind gusts getting solidly into South Florida. So you're not in the cone in South Florida, but you're going to be getting into significant wind that will cause damage and will drop trees. And then you've got these tropical storm force winds that will extend well outside of that. We take it into tomorrow evening, and you see the entire southern half, more, maybe 2/3 of the state, looking at hurricane force wind gusts by tomorrow evening. Justin, back out to you.
All right, Carl Parker. Hey, thanks so much for the explanation, and just trying to get through people's heads. It's very important they be ready all across this entire peninsula for what is going to be a major hurricane, east, west, south. Make sure you're ready. And because of what Carl was just talking about and the expected effects, the probable effects here in Orlando, plenty of closures, including at the Magic Kingdom. Walt Disney World is closing at 9 o'clock tonight. Universal Orlando closes at 7 o'clock tonight. Orlando International Airport stopping all flights out of Orlando at 5 o'clock tonight. Of course, all public schools, universities, colleges, all closed. And even SeaWorld Orlando and Busch Gardens Tampa Bay, they are going to be closing at 5 o'clock tonight. So if all those major places are closing down, remember, this is a very serious storm, and it's so important that if there is an evacuation where you are, you heed those warnings. Get out. Don't stay. Don't take it upon yourself, because you're putting other people's lives in risk. Remember that. You have people that might need to save you, the first responders and the guardsmen and women who could have to come in and save you. So please leave if there are evacuation orders. Of course, the Weather Channel will continue extensive coverage of Hurricane Irma as it approaches Florida after this.
There is a serious threat of significant storm surge flooding along the entire west coast of Florida, and this has increased to 15 feet of impact above ground level. 15 feet of impact above ground level. Think about that. 15 feet is devastating and will cover your house. In the Tampa Bay area, the surge is forecasted to be 5 to 8 feet. Think about that. The typical first story is 7 to 10 feet, 5 to 8 feet. This is a life-threatening situation. Remember, the storm surge comes after the wind. Do not think the storm is over when the wind slows down.
All right, you heard it from himself, the governor of Florida. We're talking potentially upwards of 15 feet, especially there in the southwest coast of Florida. And that is storm surge. That's above ground level. Keep in mind the water rise will be even higher. So we want to clarify, 5 to 8 feet, 5 to 8 feet storm surge here in Tampa Bay. That would be above ground level. And again, as the governor said, that could cover your whole first floor and start to get into the second floor. That is why mandatory evacuations here where we are in Tampa, downtown Tampa right behind me. We're talking a city of 3 million people. The last time Tampa has seen a major hurricane was nearly 100 years ago in 1921. So a lot of people here haven't ridden out a storm, especially of this magnitude. So a lot of urgency here, not only by the mayor, but by the governor. So if you're on the cusp, keep in mind, you still have time to evacuate, especially if you are near a storm surge prone area. They're still debating on whether they want to include Zone B here in Hillsborough County, but Zone A is under mandatory evacuation. This will be underwater in 36 hours from now. But Carl, I want to bring in, we're talking 5 to 8 feet potential storm surge here as Irma gets closer. I mean, that is just devastating news here for the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah, that's right. And storm surge is really a function of how large a system is. And this is a very large system that's going to be getting larger as it comes up and across the state over the next couple of days. And that's a big part of why we have this significant storm surge threat. Now, let's give you the latest on the storm. Now at Category 3 with 125-mile-per-hour winds. There's been some interaction with land there in Cuba, which is why it weakened a bit, but we don't expect that to last as it's going to move back out over the open water and we'll have every opportunity to strengthen back to a solid Category 4. It could get even stronger than that depending on just how far offshore it is. This is likely going to devastate parts of the Keys here as well as southwest Florida, Marco Island, Naples, Fort Myers, getting up towards Bradenton, Sarasota, Siesta Key, into Tampa as well, and then up towards the Big Bend area of Florida and even farther inland, as far inland as Orlando. There could be very significant wind, hurricane force easily, and perhaps a good bit higher than that. Then the storm comes up into North Georgia. You notice that it will weaken significantly between Monday and Tuesday, but it's going to be a solid storm as it moves up into the central part of Georgia. And again, you've got an enormous area of strong wind here. The tropical storm force winds extending out 200 miles from the center. So what the cone is showing you is where that center is going to come up most likely. But you see the strong winds extending well outside of that cone. And we are definitely going to get into hurricane force wind gusts across South Florida. So the worst of the storm in southwest Florida, but it's certainly not going to be any picnic there in South Florida. And please, please listen to your local officials and keep in mind that a lot of the public safety officers are going to be recalled once the winds get to 40 miles per hour. This is going to cause widespread power outages, not just in the peninsula of Florida, but well inland as well, probably through most of the state of Georgia, much of South Carolina, and even a little farther north and west. We will see possible power outages into Tennessee, Kentucky, into Alabama, and up through parts of the Appalachians, again, because it is such a large windstorm. And this is a look at one of our model forecasts. Now, we may see some deviation from this in terms of timing or the exact track, but it's meant to give you an idea of how it's going to happen. And there you see that most dangerous eye wall coming into the Keys overnight tonight, early tomorrow morning. Significant water level rise along with that. Water's beginning to come up there in South Florida as well. Then into tomorrow afternoon, that eye wall devastating parts of southwest Florida into the afternoon. Winds really picking up across South Florida as well and getting farther up the coast into Sarasota, Bradenton. We're getting hit by the full full force of the storm later in the day in Sarasota and Bradenton, coming into Tampa very late tomorrow. We're talking about the eye wall now. And you see also on the underside of that circulation, there's the onshore flow that's really going to pile up the water in southwest Florida. 10 to 15 feet of water level rise there. And then here you see the core coming up through Orlando. And beyond that, those strong winds moving up into northern parts of Georgia. Huge area being affected by the storm. And our coverage of Hurricane Irma continues right now here on the Weather Channel.
A storm surge of 5 to 10 feet could wipe out our low-lying areas.
Well, very concerned.
The Weather Channel started talking about this storm far enough out. They heeded our warning.
And as Irma continues to lash the Cuba coast, it also moves closer to the U.S. Now lashing South Florida with the outer bands, winds already gusty in Key West, and water filling some streets in Miami with some of those outer rain bands and tropical force winds. I'm meteorologist Jen Carfagno, and I'm live in Savannah, Georgia, where we are under a hurricane watch from Hurricane Irma, which right now has winds of 125 miles per hour. It is a Category 3 and expected to strengthen. So the winds have come down with the influence of land of Cuba, but once it goes out over to the Florida Straits, we are expecting it to re-strengthen again, with winds expected to reach 140 miles before it makes landfall in the U.S. So let's take a look at the hurricane warnings and how far north they extend all the way up into Jacksonville. The watches have been expanded as well, with hurricane watches up through southern Georgia, southeastern Georgia too, including Savannah, and the coastal areas of South Carolina. We've got tropical storm watches up, which does include the city of Charleston. The storm surge watches and warnings have been expanded as well, farther to the north. And so certainly that is going to be one of the dire concerns, especially now in southwest Florida, with that storm surge reaching over 10 to 15 feet. Very surge prone areas like Tampa Bay, looking at a 5 to 8 foot storm surge, and north of there 4 to 6 feet. The East Coast too will have some impact with 2 to 4 feet, and here in South Georgia actually a 4 to 6 foot surge. And one of the big impacts from from Irma here in Savannah will be worse than what we had in Matthew, which is at the time of high tide, we are expecting high water and expecting flooding. In fact, expecting it to be about 2 to 3 feet higher than what we had in Matthew here. So that's one of the reasons I'm here in the south, because these impacts are far reaching away from the point of landfall and actually will be a long duration as well. We're starting with the outer bands in South Florida today. We'll get the rain here in South Georgia by later tomorrow. And you can see in the Savannah area, the brunt of the bad weather will be on Monday and into Monday evening. Rainfall amounts on the order to 5 to 8 inches here. There will be local areas that get more than 10 inches of rain. Rain will be a factor into heavy rain into the rivers here into southeast Georgia, with some areas projected to be in major flooding Monday into Monday evening. All right, let's talk about the rain in South Florida too, because we know the Florida Keys already getting the outer bands and getting the rainfall. Could see over 20 to 25 inches of rain. And as we go farther north into central Florida, up into South Georgia, and this forecast goes through Tuesday, by the way, it's a widespread area of 5 to 8 and 8 to 12 inches of rain. Let's bring in Dr. Erica Navarro to talk more about one of the big concerns that I have, and that's the storm surge. And Dr. Navarro, we know that you can hide from the wind, you can be in shelter, but you have to be evacuated from water.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jen. There is just no easy way to say this, but the storm surge threat here is life-threatening across the western coast of Florida. This is an area that we know is particularly prone to storm surge, and we are anticipating here life-threatening values now with this storm, as it's going to be making its way up the western coast of Florida in the coming days. Taking a look at the latest information from the Hurricane Center, we'll have another advisory coming out in the next hour. You can see here the winds have come down just a little bit, 125 miles per hour sustained. This is still a very strong and powerful hurricane with the potential to intensify again before it makes its approach to South Florida. So please do not let your guards down here. Category 3 storm moving to the west now at 9 miles per hour. So we're seeing this storm slow down just a bit. And that is what we are anticipating when that storm makes that northward turn. It will begin to stall, and it will be stalling over some very warm water. So again, that's going to enhance that potential for that storm to intensify and come up just a little bit more before it makes landfall here somewhere along the western Florida coast. Here's a look at the satellite imagery from today. You can see there's that core of that storm in those blue and green colors there just off to the north of the coast of Cuba. This interaction with land is the reason why this storm has weakened just a little bit, because that's been disrupting the circulation. But we are already seeing the impacts beginning across areas in South Florida as these strong outer bands are moving through now from the east onto the land. We're seeing some tornado spin-ups here, or at least some tornado warnings that have come out already. Some rainfall and lightning is likely to continue here throughout the day, so the impacts again are beginning and will only worsen through the weekend with this storm as it approaches the coast. Here's the track of that storm again hugging the northern coast of Cuba. It will be exiting this area very shortly and moving into again a region here in the Florida Straits that is extremely favorable for further development. The maximum water temperature here is 91 degrees. That's well above the threshold that we need to enhance the tropical systems here. And if you just look at the broad general area, the entire area is well into the upper 80s. So again, we still have that potential for some continued strengthening. Here's a look at the latest cone. You can see now things have absolutely shifted off to the west. So we're anticipating that center of circulation to move through the Florida Keys sometime tomorrow morning and then continue basically parallel here to the Florida coast. There may be some deviations to the left or right. Even a deviation of 30 miles here could make a huge difference for the impacts across the western coast of Florida, but we will likely see a landfall here somewhere along the western coast, anywhere from the Everglades up through Fort Myers and up to Tampa. Those are not out of the realm of possibility, so please pay attention to the forecast. Again, as Jen and I were just talking about, these are the current storm surge numbers that we are talking. Look at this, the west coast of Florida from Fort Myers down through Naples. 10 to 15 feet of storm surge potential here above normally dry ground. That is a life-threatening inundation that we are expecting in this area. And this is not only just going to be along the coast. This water will rise very quickly because the shelf here, the ocean floor, is fairly shallow over the western coast of Florida. That water will move further inland. So it's not just coastal areas here that we are worried about. So please, you need to leave if you are in any of these areas. Now these numbers also to the north of Fort Myers have come up quite a bit, 6 to 10 feet now, moving up towards the Tampa Bay area. Tampa Bay, your numbers now are in the 5 to 8 foot range, which is very devastating for the Tampa Bay area. That is a high amount of storm surge to come in through that region. So again, these are life-threatening impacts here on the western coast of Florida. Down at the Keys, we're talking about 5 to 10 feet, and we still have a storm surge threat here on the eastern side of that state because we will see the onshore winds there in that area as well because of the track of this system with that center of circulation here making up its way up to the north into the state of Georgia. Here's where Jen is now on the Georgia coast. We are also talking about a storm surge there into Sunday night into Monday with the winds there coming on shore as that circulation moves up. So the threats here are not just